And I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie to do the welcome for our faculty panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. It's wonderful to have all the depth of your experience in partnering with us for such a long time and to be able to share all of that background and those examples. And faculty participants, please feel free to pop questions in the chat. If you have them, we have some prepared questions too to kick off our faculty panel. So with that, we have three faculty with us today who, well, four including Teresa, I suppose, who have taught honor seminars and who will share their experience, their knowledge and their experiences with you. And I'll ask the faculty to introduce themselves and to briefly share what honor seminars they have taught and why they choose to teach honor seminars. Again, to do that briefly to give each panelist time to share, and then we'll dive into some deeper or maybe, well, deeper questions and deeper learning. So we'll start with Chris Holland. We have Chris, your slide is up first. So Chris, if you could do an introduction, share what honor seminars you've taught and why you teach them.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Holland. I'm in the School of Art in DAP. Um, I've taught honors seminars, the two listed here, and a few others that have both had study abroad and not had study abroad. So sometimes I'll teach a seminar and it has a study abroad component, and sometimes it doesn't. They're both really fantastic. The two courses I taught lately are the ones listed here. From Neurons to Picasso, I co-teach that with Ilya Valinsky from Neuroscience. So it's an interdisciplinary course that combines inquiry in neuroscience and inquiry in art. And then the Strange Tools, Artistic Inquiry and Body Cognitive Science, I co-teach with Dr. Tony Chamero from Cognitive Science and Philosophy. I'm interested myself in the intersection between art, design, philosophy, and science. So I sought these faculty out over my time here, and we've struck up a rapport and proposed honors courses together that were successfully, I guess, run. Um, I think what I really like to do is add a practical sort of hands-on learning experience to each course. So for example, the neuroscience class with the art education class is also a lab class. So we have everything from dissecting cow eyeballs to learning how to do observational drawing. So thinking about lab in different ways was really fun for me. So I learned from my co-instructor and I hope they learn from me. Um, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you want me to say, Debbie, but yeah, I'm here to answer questions and excited about honors every time I get to teach a seminar.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's a perfect introduction. And we'll go to Flavia next to give that introduction.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm Flavia Bastos. I'm Chris Holland's colleague. We teach in the same department in the School of Art at DAP. I've been at UC for over 20 years, and I consider that the opportunity to teach at honors is one of those spaces that keeps me current and it allows me to experiment in new ways. And I have some thoughts that I think really illustrate some of the things that have been said so far about, and I'm going to like talk about what I see. It's a very selfish perspective, but I think my colleagues who are attending today might appreciate it. It's like, what are the benefits of doing this extra lift of proposing an honor seminar for a professor, particularly, and how I see that impacting my career? So the first benefit is just an opportunity to tap into your passions that may not fit your job description very well. So, I have part of my identity, like I used to be a dancer before I became a faculty member. So that is at the center of the Dance in the City course. I realized that as a supporter of the arts in my community, I have engaged in philanthropy. So that is what led to the Student Philanthropy Studio course. So those are things that are not in my job description, but that I tapped on and was able to channel through the honor seminars. As Chris has mentioned, the connection with colleagues, which is not a superficial connection, is an opportunity to learn from each other. So the two colleagues with whom I work in these courses would be people that are not in my department. I would never work with them. So that has been incredibly enriching. I also think that working with honors students has created unique opportunities to advance my teaching and research, both generating ideas, but also as a sort of a space to apply some of the more daring things I just didn't feel I had the space to do in a traditional classroom. I see the investment of our honors program that the university does to be kind of a venture capital opportunity, right? It's sort of this infrastructure and financial investment in allowing faculty to really try new things. And I think that that pays off in a variety of ways. I particularly enjoy the opportunity to mentor what I perceive to be the next generation of leaders. And if I reflect on where the honors students I worked with have been after being my students, it's incredibly impressive. You know, they went on to Fulbright opportunities. Many of them went on to graduate school. They behave already in the class, but certainly afterwards as civically engaged, people. They care about the community. So it's a different, more impact-oriented kind of student that is really a privilege to work with. So for those reasons alone, I think those of you who are attending today and are thinking about developing a class, I hope that you ask lots of questions so that you can tap into this opportunity.
Flavia, thank you. That was fantastic. And Zach, I will provide Zach with the opportunity to do an introduction and share a little bit about the why, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, I'm Zach Fuchs. I'm an associate professor over in electrical and computer engineering, and I've taught my pinball design and programming class for, this might be my 4th or 5th year. I don't know. I was on sabbatical last year, so I've lost track of what year I'm at. And really, this class was a spin-off of a project I did for one of my elective courses I teach in my department. So I teach a mechatronics course that's really an upper level, hardcore computer electrical engineering elective course in our program. And I've taught mechatronics for a long time, but well, not recently anymore, but 4 or 5 years ago, I got into pinball as a hobby. And I realized it has the same stuff, the same technology that I teach in my class. So for that mechatronics course, I created a custom pinball machine that we then use as like an overarching project, and the students learn to program it and stuff like that. And that was really cool, but and I really enjoyed building the machine itself, but in that class, they don't build the machine. They just learn how to make the electronics to make the machine work. So I was like, well, it'd be really awesome if I could create a class where like the students actually got to build the machine as well. But that doesn't really fit into our curriculum. That would be very hard to justify that class in our normal electrical and computer engineering program. And then I attended a workshop just like this for the honors program like 5 years ago. And I was like, hey, this sounds like the perfect opportunity to make this class. And so basically in this pinball design class, students pick a theme, and we spend the whole semester basically building pinball machines to capture their theme. And it's a super multidisciplinary type course. We talk about the electronics of the pinball machine. We talk about the mechanical design of it. We talk about kind of the industrial design of it, how to make it look cool. We talk about the art. We talk about the music. We talk about the animation. We also talk about the history of pinball, because pinball is actually over 100 years old. Like the original kind of pinball patent was from a guy in Cincinnati, like 100 years ago, 120 years ago. There was a pinball prohibition for like 30 years. So we can talk about that. And then I actually, over the course of developing these classes, I've formed really good connections with pinball industry. So I bring in guest lecturers, like real pinball design teams. And then in previous years, we've gone up to Chicago and toured pinball factories. This year, we're not going to Chicago, but we're doing a local pinball show called Cincinnati that's in December. So the students at the end of the semester will have an opportunity to set up their machines at this pinball show. With, basically it's all these pinball enthusiasts bring in their personal machines. So there's like 300 pinball machines at this show. And then our students will get to show their machines next to all these commercial machines, and share it with, all the other pinball nerds like myself there. And then let's see. Also, like I said, in previous years, we've had guest lectures from real pinball designers. This year, so I was on sabbatical last year, and as part of developing this class, like I mentioned, I've developed really close connections with these pinball companies because they've been very supportive of what I've done. They've donated hardware, they've sent all kinds of design files and stuff, and they actually hired me over sabbatical. So I helped design some elements of real machines. For example, I helped with the Dragon inside of a D&D machine that they released a couple months ago. And I have that machine. So now that's in the lab and the students get to play that machine. And we're going to have the D&D design team do the guest lecture for the class. So I have like some of the prototypes that I built of the Dragon. They're going to talk about the larger design of the machine. And then the students get to ask them questions and stuff like that, which is really cool. And yeah, but in general, this is my favorite class to teach. It's opened a lot of doors for me professionally. Like I work for pinball companies now. And also academically, I've recruited really good students to work in my lab that are outside of my department. I've had a mechanical engineering student do a research project in my lab. He's written papers as an undergrad. And then just last week, this semester, I have a biomed student was doing, I think, mechanical for a master's degree. He was thinking about doing mechanicals for a master's degree, but he's going to work in my lab now. So I recruited a grad student already this year, which is great. But yeah, so I can talk. This is my favorite class to teach. It's been an awesome opportunity. And I'm really grateful that this program exists. So thanks.
Zach, that's amazing. I love to hear that you recruited a grad student, because that's that's an incredible outcome for honor seminars, and that's something we want to happen. We want these connections to feed and live on after the honor seminar itself takes place. For all three faculty, and especially Chris, you went first, are there other benefits to teaching honor seminars that you have experienced that you haven't talked about yet?
I mean, for me, when I go on the trips, it's always a great experience. So I've taken students to New York, Dubai, Amsterdam, Paris over the years, and every international experience, I learn a lot from the students, just, how they interact. The world's changed a lot in 15 years as far as how they navigate. So we were just in Amsterdam, and the city's like, 2025 ready. So the students hit the ground running where, years ago, I'd have to do a lot of prep work. It seems now they're already ready to go. But so they teach me how to navigate these cities in some sense, and they're from their perspective. And that's always really interesting to me as I get older. What does a 20-something see in Amsterdam that I don't see, right? Or Paris or Dubai. I think that's what's been really amazing with the study abroad component that I enjoy.
And it doesn't look like our faculty guests have any questions yet. Please feel free to raise your hand or include it in the chat. So the next question I'll ask of our panelists is, and I'll pop this in the chat as well for everyone to be able to see there, how do you make your course accessible to students across disciplines, across years? So you may have first-year students in your class, you may have senior level students, you may have a ballet major, English majors, nursing majors, STEM majors, engineers, all across the board. You're going to have this coming together in your classes. So how do you make that work while still being an intellectually rigorous course?
Was that okay if I answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what makes that magic of bringing students who have different perspectives and may have different levels of skill, competency together. The magic works because the course is really focused on experiential learning. So in other words, you are doing things together, and to do a complex project together, people can come as they are, and all what they have to bring ends up being becomes an asset. You know, even if you are a novice and you are asking very basic questions, just the opportunity for the others who know this is the way we do things to have to explain and justify and revisit that with their peers becomes an enriching experience. So I haven't found that to be a challenge as long as you create this engaged experience for students. Like when things kind of flatline is, you know, another students can summarize a reading like nobody, right? With their ties, their arms tied behind their back. I mean, if you ask for a summary of a reading, like you get excellent work. I mean, no big sweat there. And that's important. You have to include that in your course because you want to make sure they are reading, blah, blah, blah. But that's really not where the excitement lies. So, for example, just because I like stories, so in the Dance in the City course, we developed this creative reflection protocol. So after each class, one of the students is assigned the responsibility to create an artistic artifact that summarizes their learnings from that previous class, and he or she has to present it at next time we meet. We've gotten all kinds of outcomes. We got videos, we got poems, we got embroidery, we got infographics, and it's a great way to recap what just happened. And it's, you know, it's a doing thing as opposed to sort of a traditional academic artifact. So those are my lessons learned.
Thank you, Flavia. Chris or Zach, do you have thoughts on that question? How do you make your course accessible to students across the disciplines and still make it rigorous, intellectually challenging?
I mean, I could comment a little bit on it. So, you know, as an engineering professor, like, you know, all my courses that I try to teach are very lab based and, you know, design oriented. And this class is that way too. Except, you know, actually this semester I only have one student from my home department, and all the other students are actually, I think the vast majority of them are outside of the College of Engineering, right? So like the way I structure my class is, again, we're building this machine. There's a series of milestones that they have to reach in the design of that machine. And those milestones are really just like the bare skeleton of a pinball machine. And it kind of pushes them along to get the bare functionality of the machine up and running. And then I kind of open it up, and pinball's nice because it uses all kinds of different disciplines to tell these stories inside of the game. And then the students are free to kind of take their skill set and really dig into that part of the machine, right? So we have a lot of DAP students that take my class. A lot of them, you know, do graphic design, and they really dig into that, and they do a lot of really cool graphics and stuff like that. Or they do industrial design and they design some cool device. You know, I do have some computer science or computer engineering students who do some really cool programming on the programming side of it. And then, you know, I have like history students who get like, they write a whole like backstory of like the rule set and stuff like that. So like, you know, the required part, the hard requirement, I kind of do a lot of spoon feeding to get the machine up and running for them. But then the part that they bring to the table is a lot more free form, and they're able to kind of pick and choose the angle that they want to kind of hit the project at. And that's actually worked out really well. And also I kind of, they're free to pick their own teams. They're 3-person teams, but I kind of make sure I usually have some requirements that they can't have multiple students from the same department on the team. So it forces kind of these, you know, multidisciplinary teams. And it's really kind of cool to see how everyone mixes their talents together to create these amazing devices at the end of the semester. So
Thanks, Zach. Chris, do you have thoughts on how you do that in your courses?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both my colleagues. I think what Zach said at the end is something we do. So it's like intentional collaboration. So they have to work in teams on in-class projects, outside class projects. And yeah, one rule is they can't pick someone from their college to start with. Sometimes it just works out where the teams have to have, a couple people, but and then when we switch them around, I mean, getting the students to get to know each other is important. So we spend the first 2 or 3 weeks really working on that. Sort of like what do you bring to the table? We try to structure some of the labs, sort of, showcase different skill sets. Like Dr. Flavia was saying that, they can all take information and regurgitate it in like the traditional ways. So, instead of responding to a reading with writing, have them respond to it with different types of things. Like we don't do dance, but they can respond in drawing, they can respond with audio, video. So their assignments sort of allow them to sort of flex that. And then failure is important. So, we try to structure it up so that maybe it's an impossible project, so they need someone else to succeed, and these students are used to succeeding. So I think it's fun to like show their limitations, and how you overcome them is through collaboration is sort of how I see it. So yeah, that's what I'd add.
Thanks, Chris. I popped the next question for our panelists in the chat. How do you assess learning? This is a question that often comes up in these workshops. How do you assess it? What types of assignments and projects do you give students? And this varies widely across honor seminars, so I'm always intrigued and I learn a lot from faculty when you share what you do.
I mean, I can talk about, I guess, how my class is structured. So again, the overall goal of this class is to build a pinball machine. So it's like 2 weeks-ish, we have a capability milestone that the students have to reach. So they're assigned this kind of demonstration milestone like 2 weeks in advance. And there's a little design element in it. So they kind of write a little bit about how the design's going to work for that step. And then they build it, and then they have to demonstrate it. And there's a grading rubric of partial credit. These students are really good, so they pretty much always go for full credit. I don't think I've ever had anyone settle for partial credit. But they have to show that they've reached this capability milestone in the machine. And these kind of milestones build up in complexity over the course of the semester. So that's kind of the primary track of evaluation. And then we also have a preliminary theme proposal. So that's for my class due next week, where they have had to form teams at this point and then pick a theme and then basically propose to me what their theme is going to be and how it's going to map to different elements of the machine. So I have some bare requirements of every machine. They have to say, hey, this is my theme, this is the story, this is how this element ties into the story, this is how this element ties into it. So that's like a little report. I read it, check it off. Then they have a preliminary design report in a few weeks. So that's just theme. Then they have to do a design. And at the very end, there's a final design report of what they actually did and how it all ties in there. So that's kind of the mechanics of how my assessment works. And it's all really kind of, again, just kind of push them along and guide them and hold their hand to build a machine. Because, if I just say build a machine, no one knows how to do that. So.
Thanks, Zach. Flavia?
I think there are sort of two dimensions of assessment for me. One is sort of assessing the process. So I'm very deliberate in creating opportunities for feedback regarding the process. So if they are working in teams, how is that dynamics work? So that is to like build on what Chris said about failure. That is a moment when they realize that their assumptions about teamwork, which typically are we assign different pieces of this elephant for different people to draw, and we'll put them together, and it's going to, it's going to come up as a whole elephant. It doesn't work that way, right? Teamwork is really going through all these tasks together, offering your skills and knowledge to complete them. So there is a moment where like, oh, the way we are doing this is not working. We have to regroup. So there are these opportunities for feedback regarding process. And then the other thing that I have done in both of my classes is ask the students to create some kind of a portfolio of their experience that they can plug and play their honors portfolio as well. But then when I have the opportunity to actually sit individually with the students and have them show me their portfolio and highlight which were sort of pivotal experiences during the course, so that I understand how that had individual meaning for different students. So that is kind of this process, and then sort of the individual experience and how students benefited from the class. And we don't grade on a curve. So that's also another important thing to say.
Thanks, Flavia. Chris, do you have thoughts on this one?
Those are really great assessments from my colleagues. I think the only thing I'd add is sometimes we have peer assessment, so they'll do, a project during class, and then they'll rate each other's project. It's common in studio art to have critiques where other students chime in and talk about work, and that's something new for a lot of students, to have like a peer give you feedback. But they seem to appreciate that, because it's sort of, we as professors have a certain way we want things to be or be seen. But it's kind of interesting to hear what the peers got out of it, and I always learn to see a project maybe differently. So that's what I would add, is maybe thinking about some peer assessment along the way too, in addition to reflective assessment and project assessments my colleagues talked about.
That's valuable, Chris. Thank you for that. And you mentioned reflective assessment. The next question I'm throwing at our panel is, how do you integrate reflection into your courses and into your students' experiences? And thinking about that in terms of ongoing reflection through the semester, and how do you engage them in that comprehensively at the end as well?
I mean, I guess I can start. We typically have in my class a weekly reflective assignment that's no more than a page about what the previous class was about. So it's sort of like they go home, they think about the class discussion, and then have to write up a reflection. They also keep something we call, like, for lack of a better term, Leonardo notebook. So they keep a notebook where they draw, they doodle, they reflect on what the discussion in class is, and they have that at the end, and they can kind of go back, and it's like, okay, do you remember when we dissected the eyeball? What were you feeling? How does that fit into the final? And then they can go back and be like, oh yeah, I really thought it was gross, or and so they sort of maybe forget, so it's a nice record to have. So in class they have, or they bring in their own. I mean, a lot of our students in studio have sketchbooks, so that might be a model where they have an 11 by 14 sketchbook. And I have a couple that I show the students from previous students that have left them, but we keep that as a running assessment in the class. And then if they have a broad experience, they sort of amp that up for the week they're on the trip. Those are like the two kind of main ones that kind of are weekly and kind of thread throughout the class that I think have worked well for me and my colleagues.
Those are great examples. Thanks, Chris. Flavia or Zach?
Well, I talked a little bit about the creative reflection, which was an attempt to incorporate reflection. In the philanthropy course, we do more traditional reflection, as in they write a reflection after every week. Sometimes there is a prompt in the beginning of the semester. There is a prompt. Towards the end of the semester, the prompts are a little more open-ended, and they include things like, is there something else you want to reflect on? And I find that they are helpful because sometimes reflections can become just shallow, I guess. They just, I like this, I noticed that. So The prompts help focus the reflection a little bit more where we want the students to go. And I find that that makes the exercise more valuable.
Flavia, what I'm hearing from what you're saying too is you're forcing the students to get into the now what that Teresa was talking about way earlier in her portion, so that it's easy for them to stay in the what did we do? So what are we learn from it? But really getting to that now, how do we move it forward and integrate it and get into the deep, harder parts of it? Sometimes we really have to challenge students to make sure that we get there. Zach, any thoughts? Oh, Flavia, did you have something to add to that?
I've been meaning to say this, and I'm not sure if I'm going to say in a way that everybody will be with me, but I think the students have changed, and there is an aspect of getting them outside themselves that requires a little more coaxing, especially after COVID. I know this sounds really trite, but it's true, than it did before. And I think that getting outside of themselves and taking personal and intellectual risks is critical to the success of what we wanted to accomplish with these honor seminars. So I think in designing these courses, I find myself like being a lot more explicit about what participation looks like, what a good discussion looks like. When you have a guest speaker, how do you prepare, right? So I say things like, you have to come with 3 written questions. You have to ask at least one of them. If your questions have all been taken by other people, you have to make a statement to that effect. So you don't get to withdraw into your own space. So anyway, I just think that those are sort of pedagogical considerations that are critical for advancing experiential learning into sort of the 21st century post-COVID space.
I was gonna say I had similar challenges and adaptations with bringing guests, like the guest design teams in from Stern. Like the first couple times I did it, I was like, yeah, we're gonna have this design team, that you can ask them any question you want. It's kind of free form, and they'd all just sit there. And I was like, okay, lesson learned on my part. And now, like, I do this very similar thing, like in preparation for this meeting. We basically, the lecture before, I'm like, look, everyone needs to ask a question. Here's some examples of types of questions, broadly, that you might broach to designers of pinball machines. Don't use these questions. Think of your own questions. But basically, yeah, like everyone needs to engage in this. And I think part of it is post-COVID. Like, I mean, I know I've noticed it. I haven't been teaching that long, but I taught before COVID and I've taught after, and I've definitely noticed the change in the level of engagement and the type of engagement and the risk. It's not even a real risk, but like the social risk of putting yourself out there and asking questions that students are willing to take. So that's, I agree. I've noticed that as well. And as far as reflection in my course, honestly, that's a challenge I'm an engineering professor, right? Like, we don't do a lot of reflection in our courses. And that's not something that I was used to integrating into my classes. So it was pushed me out of my comfort zone, which is good for a faculty member as well. But basically, I try to bring it into when they do these proposals throughout the semester. So I don't necessarily have explicit reflection questions in these milestones. I mean, because they're more like engineering type deliverables. But we do have reflections in the reports that they have to write, especially when they're picking a theme, because it's, they're picking this theme. So it's a lot of questions about, like, we also have research days where we go and play pinball in my lab. I have a bunch of pinball machines in my lab. We play those. So I asked about, like, what themes do you see missing out in the commercial pinball world, right? And why do you think they're missing there? And, like, what themes would you like to see? And what theme are you picking, and why are you picking that theme? And then we also have some reflection after we meet the designers and design teams. And then when we used to go up to Chicago and visit the factory, that's a pretty interesting dynamic as well, because 95% of the workers in this factory are immigrants, like migrant labor who are working in this factory, and 95% of the people running the factory are not. So it's a very interesting kind of dynamic. It's like it's not exploitive, but it's noticeable that this is going on. So we kind of talk about that as well. And then also historically, pinball was a very much a male dominated design industry. That is changing though. Like they're actively changing that, but we talk about that as well. So
Zach, thank you. It's great to hear all the different ways that you all do that. And I realized that we have Teresa here, and she shared information at the beginning, but Teresa's been teaching an honor seminar for quite a while. So I'll ask Teresa to share about her honor seminar. And then the last official question for our faculty panel will be, what advice do you have for faculty who are thinking about jumping into this? So Teresa will share. I'll ask our panelists to answer that final question. I'd also put that question in the chat. What advice do you have? Anything you haven't shared yet? And then I'm also going to pop something in the chat and ask our participants what your ideas are for honor seminars. If you'd like to share them there, please feel free to do that. So Teresa?
Yeah, thank you. So I worked with honors for a while before I decided I was going to do my own honor seminar. And it's actually, I'm a biologist, so it sort of has a biology theme, but it's about something that no one likes to talk about, yet we all experience. So it's the elephant in the room, and that is death and dying. And so the course is called Dying Well. And it turns out it's pretty popular. Students love to talk about this. And so the idea is what we do, and I say I taught this first individually, and then I was having one of these workshops, and I had someone come up to me afterwards, Laura Anderson from English, and she's like, I have always been thinking about this. Can I co-teach with you? So we now co-teach together. And so the point of the project of the class is we talk first about the biological underpinnings of death and dying, like how does that happen? Because it's a biology course. But more importantly, it touches on all different aspects of the course. And so it talks about religion, philosophy, law, all these different parts, insurance. I mean, we go through everything. The students, the very first day, is sort of a shocker because they have to write their own obituary. And so throughout the semester, we do things where they write a eulogy. There's a huge amount of reflection. Their obituary is their choice. They can live as long as they want. It could be tomorrow. So it's a lot of options. Again, they drive the bus for each of themselves. We have guest speakers who come in and talk about animals, what does death and look like that? And most students up to that point, many students have only had the experience of like their pet dog, their pet fish dying. And so we've also had, every time we've done it during the class, we usually have someone's grandparent unfortunately pass away. And so the students learn to lean on each other a bit, which is just interesting to see how that happens. So for me, it's a passion project because I've had an interesting, not so great experience when my grandmother passed away. And I also want to mention that the whole idea of this class actually came from students. So I was sitting at a lunch one day with a bunch of honor students, and I don't know how we got on it. We started talking about death and grandparents dying and how no one's prepared, and we need to do a better job thinking about this. But the class itself, even though it's on death and dying, it's really about how to live your life the best it can be. So that's sort of like the underlying way that we do it. So I want to, oh, good. Sarah has a question too. Caroline. Oh, yeah, we were getting questions here. Debbie, I don't know how you want to do it. We're really interested in hearing your ideas, and we also have, we're willing to help and work with you as well.
Yeah, I asked in the chat for folks if they're comfortable to share their ideas for honor seminars and what folks are planning to do. And a couple people have had to leave to get to other classes. We crossed over a class block, so we've had a few people leave during that time period too. Yeah, so we have about 10 minutes left in our scheduled time. And so if our faculty who the last question I had was what for our faculty panelists and Teresa as well, whatever you would like to share, what advice do you have for folks thinking about these ideas and putting these proposals together? The ideas in the chat are fantastic. Thinking about a course in digital fabrication with an emphasis on digital stone carving with a potential study abroad component in Italy, and developing honor seminars that study the National Association of the Deaf and World Federation of the Deaf, and then go to their conferences and congresses. And I don't think I missed anything in the chat, hopefully not, but panelists, what advice would you like to leave our faculty participants with?
I can just say that for me, what was the difference that made the difference in bringing these ideas to fruition was talking about them with other people. Teresa was one of the first people when I was thinking of teaching honors, I made a list of all the things that might become a course, and she was like, this is better than that, or this is more developed than that. Maybe that was probably a more accurate feedback that I received. But really, that process of talking and having critical friends really helps develop these ideas into a course that can be taught. So I think talk to us, talk to each other about the course that you want to take, and eventually it will sort of crystallize in your head and it will be a successful proposal.
I have a question, if it's okay.
Absolutely.
Especially for Zach and Chris, some of the courses that it seems like you've offered, there's a material component where students are actually working with materials and maybe getting technical support from outside partners like a company. I'm curious, does the Honors College help support some of that? Just straight up material costs for students, or maybe Zach, directly to you, like making a pinball machine is obviously very material intensive. How do you balance that, and how'd you work that into your proposal?
So, I mean, Debbie could probably answer more from a honors support side, but we do get a stipend from the honors program when we teach our courses, and that has helped a lot. For my stuff, like I said, I literally went to Stern Pinball's website on their contact us text box and was like, "Hey, I'm doing this crazy pinball class stuff. I have a whole white paper, but I don't know who to send it to." And I like, let me know if you're interested. Is a little more formal than that, but that's basically the gist of what I sent them. And that's how I started that. And I met with them and started talking about the classes, and they were super supportive. And they've donated tens of thousands of dollars of hardware to my lab and my classes, just to support predominantly this design class as well as the mechatronics course. And then I also, my department's been very supportive. And we've written Department of Higher Education proposals, and we've got some funding from the Ohio Department of Higher Education to buy like benchtop lab equipment. So things like power supplies and oscilloscopes that we can use for multiple courses. But this class and my other mechatronics pinball class were kind of the driving force for writing those proposals and getting that funding and that equipment. And then also, I do a lot of work for the Department of Defense in my real job, like my real academic researchy job. And I'm fortunate enough to get a decent chunk of funding for that. And then we get a small cut of that into our RIA funds from overhead and all that stuff. And I've personally been using my slush fund money a lot to support things as well. That is not necessary, right? Like I've kind of gone and done that. And it's also been very helpful because I was tenure track and working towards tenure. So again, having this vehicle to help bring in and reach out to these companies and bring in funding and bring in equipment was really nice when I had to go up for tenure as well. So I I took all the angles. I had honors funding, corporate external company funding, state level funding, and then federal research funding kind of coming back through as well. So
Yeah, and Zach, if we think about a continuum of like how much funding is that all the avenues that you pursued and what you made happen on your typical course, Zach's is on the high end of probably what you needed to make it all happen, but also the resources and the context you have and how things aligned. It's just incredible, absolutely incredible what you've been able to do. Zach mentioned the funding that we provide. The University Honors Program provides $6,000 for an individually taught course to your college or department. Every college / department handles that differently. So you need to talk with your department head and know and understand within your college how that's handled. In most cases, the faculty don't see that funding that goes to the college to offset the time and energy that you're spending teaching this course for us, rather than teaching a course within your unit or your department. In some cases, faculty are able to utilize those funds, but in most cases they're not. So I want to be really open and clear about that for folks across other colleges. And we do, though, in the proposal, there's a section for budget, and you can include in there what you might need. We have a great course that is offered by engineering that traveled to Oak Ridge National Lab last spring, and we provided funding for the buses to go there, for example. So we're able to provide funding for course supplies, for buses, for field trips, for admission tickets, for Teresa and Chris, I can't remember what specifically we have provided for your classes, so you can share that too, but definitely put what you're thinking about in the budget, and then we go from there. Teresa?
Yeah, I was just going to add in one more thing, a component I don't think we've talked about is that when you put in your proposal, you will need to include a letter, an email, or something from the head of your department or your unit saying that it's okay to do it. And that's also, you need to, beforehand, I would recommend, especially if you're new, talking with your head to make sure it's okay, because I've seen it dealt with different ways. So whether an honors course is part of your normal workload or considered extra. In my case, how does it work? It's considered extra, but in my case, I'm allowed to keep the funding that comes to me for my course, and sometimes I use it for my course or actually for my students. So again, it's different based on the unit or the college you're in.
I know we're at time. I'm going to follow up with, or we're almost at time. I will follow up with an email to all of our participants and share some of these resources and things that we've referenced. You can always reach out to me with any questions about honor seminars, reach out to our faculty panelists, reach out to Teresa to talk about ideas for development. We're happy to meet with you and brainstorm or, workshop, do anything that's helpful to you as you develop these and provide the support that you need to engage in these processes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Dell. I'm Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in CECH. I'm also an Associate Professor in the School of Education. I've done a couple of different honors courses. The first one I did was focused on STEM learning in children's media and in children's learning. That was one that took a giant turn because it was during the pandemic year. So we had a big shift in the original plan, but that was the first one that I taught. I taught that with a faculty member, Nancy Jennings, in arts and sciences, and I always mess up their school name now. They're like the School of Communication. Anyway, she's a faculty member in communication. So she and I have done research together. We also teach together a lot. She's a faculty member. It's very interested in children's media. I have a background in children's media, but also in children's learning in non-traditional spaces like museums, zoos, public television, those kinds of things. So that was the first class we did. And then we have a second class that we've done that we've now done it for 3 years that I teach with Nancy Jennings in Arts and Sciences and also Sarah Schroeder, who's also a faculty member in the School of Education. And we look at social justice topics in children's public spaces. And we include that pretty broadly. So that can be children's literature, children's media, museums, public parks, really libraries, really anything that is kind of an out of school learning space for children, and how does social justice operate in those spaces. We do this in partnership with local museums, and we've been able to actually bring students' final work into museum settings. The first 2 years we worked with the Contemporary Arts Center, and our students actually put up and built exhibits that were in their children's space that were up for a week and as public exhibits, and they could we had kind of a opening exhibit reception, and we've done all sorts of things, but they also got to see real families working with the exhibits they designed. We work closely with the Makerspace in 1819 to have students building the exhibits that they were making. We talk about design principles, also talk a lot about children's learning and development. We almost never have education students that sign up for these honors classes. It's almost always non-education related majors. We tend to get a lot of medical students, which is interesting. It's one of the things actually I love about teaching honors courses is meeting students from all over campus and getting those students together to talk about concepts. This past year, we worked with a new museum partner. We worked with Cincinnati Museum Center and specifically the Children's Museum inside the Museum Center. And instead of doing an exhibit, our students built activity carts that we then were able, so one, we were able to go onto the floor and actually use them in the space so the children could interact with what our students built on the floor of the Children's Museum. And then we've actually boxed up those materials and have donated them to the museum center as part of, kind of art cart stations are very typical in their education design. So that was one of our key partners. One of the things that we really have found interesting in our work is it's a class very much about design and about really understanding your audience in design. And what we've learned is many times design is an iterative process that you're tweaking things. You don't just go with your first design. And this is a big challenge for honors students. Honors students are sometimes or many times very kind of type A thinkers. They're used to having the right answer the first time, solving, moving forward on to the next thing. This really pushes their brains in new ways because as they're designing, since we have 3 faculty members kind of circulating, we are always challenging. What do you think is going to happen? How's going a kid interact with that? How's a 4-year-old going to interact with that versus a 10-year-old? What kind of language? Actually, this past year, I have a 9-year-old at home. We brought her in as an expert one day to look at their designs, and she gave really good feedback. One of them was around vocabulary. She's like, kids don't know those words to one of my team. So really kind of centering and positioning her as an expert. So she was very helpful with her little 9-year-old brain. So those are some things that we do. So it's very community based. It's getting kids to think about it. One of the things I like talking about children's development and children's learning with non-educators is I think it's something everybody needs to know about. Most people in their adult lives will have a moment where they have to make a decision about what's appropriate for a child. Whether you're a parent, an aunt, an uncle, you tend to have those moments in life where you're trying to decide, should my kid play with this? Is this a good thing to play with, not play with? Where should we go? So we really feel like it's a very relevant course really for any student, not just education majors, but really anybody who's at some point going to have a child in their life, which is most people. So.
Thank you, Laura. And we'll be able to hear more about Laura's class and experiences with further questions as well. I'll turn it over to Dinch. Dinch, if you could talk about your honor seminar and why you chose to teach it, that would be great.
Yeah, Dinch Evdenis. I'm a mechanical engineering assistant professor. I'm teaching this course for the 2nd time this semester, so I would say still it's under development. But the idea came from my teaching to second-year engineering students about material science, and usually like large classes, and it's easy to lose their interest. And they always perked up when I mentioned something like, oh, by the way, Titanic sank because of this issue that they didn't know about at the time. So that kind of kick-started kind of developing this class about just using engineering catastrophes and kind of connecting them to material science and engineering to talk about different concepts. But more than that, in this class, I try to show that yes, the scientifically speaking, the cause of the failure was this material science concept, but there is a lot more than that. We talk about Titanic, and we talk about how cold temperature affected the material's performance, but also they were very cocky about their new design. And we talk about the Challenger disaster and how this rubber gasket couldn't perform at cold temperature, but also NASA pushed unnecessarily for that launch when the temperature was a lot colder than usual. So not only that, we look at the scientific side of things, but we also look at societal impact, ethical considerations, and always end up with, okay, yeah, this happened. What did we learn from it? If we learned anything from it, and how did that change that particular field? One of the main themes that we try to follow here is anytime we're talking about the scientific concept, how can we communicate this to general public? Because a lot of times it's important to make that connection with people. If you're talking to someone that doesn't have an engineering or a STEM background, how do you explain something really complex? For that, I try to use a lot of different demonstrations. For example, yesterday we talked about 9/11, the collapse of Twin Towers. And at the time when this happened, there were a lot of talks about the design was deficient, the steel melted, none of which was true. And we used a piece of Hershey bar and heated up with a hair dryer and showed how when sometimes materials, as they heat up, they soften and start sagging. And that was the main reason for the collapse. So we do a lot of things like that. We develop very simple experiments that you can do with everyday objects and try to communicate the concept as much as possible. Maybe it's not directly related to the scientific concept, but at least it connects to what people already know and try to connect to what actually happened. So then the main project that students work on in this class is that they develop a YouTube video to explain a disaster of their own choosing, try to connect to a scientific concept, hopefully in material science, and do this kind of demonstration, but also look at societal impact, ethical considerations, and also aftermath. What happened? What did we learn? How did we develop after that? To support the students, we bring in guest speakers into the classroom. We have a speaker on public engagement in science. We have a speaker on science communication, and we have a speaker on digital content creation, so that the students are a little bit more supported. They have the necessary tools to develop those videos. One of the main reasons that I created this course was actually, I enjoy working with students in general. The profile of our honor students it's great. They're all often interested and they want to do things and they ask good questions and the class is usually fun. But also the things that they develop, the demonstrations that they develop, and I'm also forced to develop new things to teach them. I bring some of those to a summer camp for high school teachers. There are high school programs in material science, and some of those high school teachers attend these camps. And I sometimes volunteer there and bring these in and try to show them some tools that they can take into their classrooms and try to increase the impact rather than me working with high school students directly. I work with the teachers and they work with their students. That's actually part of my NSF career proposal that I submitted this past summer. So essentially, I'm using this course to develop materials and take them to a teacher's camp to increase impact. And that also connects to my research, which is on material failure. When I talk to like a, I don't know, non-engineers, I usually tell them that I like breaking things and try to understand why they broke. So that's essentially the essence of it. I hope I covered everything that I was supposed to cover.
Yeah, Dinch, that was great. And it's great to hear how the impact through both you and Laura, how the impact of the work that you're doing, it goes beyond the honors seminar itself. And it ripples out and has all these, and that's what we want. That's the whole part of the whole purpose behind this. So it's great to hear that. Zvi is our final faculty panelist. So I'll ask Zvi to talk about this course or any courses really that you've taught. Zvi's taught a bunch of different things with us. So Zvi, focus on whichever course or courses you would like to, and we'll go from there. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Zvi Biener, professor in philosophy. I was just trying to think of how many courses I've taught. I think I've taught 5 different honors courses in my tenure here, some of them multiple times. Though many of the points have been covered already in the previous 2 slides, but I'll talk anyway. The most recent 2 seminars are taught, you could see them up there. One is called Big Data, Bigger Questions. That was a solo course about interpretation of data. And then a co-taught course with Josh Miller in geology, dinosaurs, dragons, and dogma, where we examine basically knowledge of the deep past through fossils and its broader implications in society. The theme, I guess, in both these courses, and what I've stressed in the past in these sort of meetings, is that what's cool about honors courses is that you could ask the students to do things that you wouldn't ask a normal class to do. You could ask them to do things that require more initiatives on their part than would be reasonable for a standard class. So for example, in the Big Data, Bigger Questions, we actually, excuse me, very kindly got from Debbie enrollment data from UHB for God knows how many years it was at the time, but a chunk of data. And the class project, they all had to work on the same project, was to analyze that data and make recommendations to the Honors College about when to offer courses, what courses to offer, etc. The students managed most of that process themselves. I was there kind of as a kind of a bumper, just to like steer them in the right direction here and there. But they did all of it themselves. What's cool about projects like that is that because UHB also draws from all these different backgrounds, there were different people that could do radically different things within the project. So for example, the sciencey people or the engineering people were very into the data analysis itself. So they spent their time in Excel, looking at things. Folks from DAP were better suited for the visual representation of stuff. So they took what the engineers got out of the Excel sheet and made it pretty and presentable. And you could see how that goes from like, variety of, some people thought about the implications, etc. But they sort of did it themselves, and were able to slot each one of them into different facets of the project. And that's, I think, what's very cool about the UHB seminars is that you could have projects that have this kind of complicated shape to them. So it wasn't just data analysis. It was data analysis and presentation and like live presentation, because they delivered the results back to Debbie and some other people in the Honors College. They did a whole presentation about it. So each could contribute a little part, and the projects could be very complicated and multifaceted because of that. in the Dinosaurs, Dragons, and Dogma course, really the two events that the course kind of leads to is one, a visit to Cincinnati Museum Center, as well as the Museum Center like back end that you don't get to see, but through Josh Miller, we're able to get in there and see actually where the fossils are kept and like the millions of fossils that they have that are not at all in the museum. And a visit to the Creation Museum, which is not too far away from here. And the kind of point of the course was to compare how these two institutions use knowledge generated through fossils, how they use the fossils themselves, how they draw inferences from them, to what purpose do they draw inferences to them, how do they use the resulting knowledge, etc. So lots of complicated questions. But the point is that it's in this course, the cool thing is that it's very experiential. That is, they have to like be in the space and think about, for example, how is it that I'm led through the Creation Museum versus the Cincinnati Museum Center. By the way, if you care to know, in the Creation Museum, you have one path that you can follow. In the Cincinnati Museum Center, you can choose lots of different ways to go through the museum. Now, what does that mean? Right? So now I have to think about, okay, so what does that mean about the acquisition of knowledge to people going through the museum center versus going through the Creation Museum, stuff like that. So I think that's a sort of like view into what is experiential, one way in which experiential learning can happen in this context. Other courses I've done, we've taken students abroad to England on a course on the Enlightenment. There was a course about setting personal goals and meeting them with, how am I forgetting his name? Anyway, I was co-taught. Yeah, and they both basically share these themes. Complicated projects are possible, and those projects kind of draw on immediate book learning. They have to use book learning, but kind of the object of their analysis is not the text itself. Yeah, I think that's it.
Cool. Thank you, Zvi. That was really helpful to hear about your courses as well. And I'll stop sharing the screen so we can open it up to questions if any of our faculty guests have questions. If not, I will ask how our faculty panelists, is there anything else, some of you touched on this, but is there anything else that you would want to share with someone working on creating an honors course about how you make the course accessible to UHP students from across disciplines and across years? So you could have first years through seniors in your honor seminar class. You'll have students from across the colleges in your class. How do you make it accessible to those students while still being rigorous in the ways that you described here?
Okay, I'll jump in. I don't think there's a silver bullet here. I think the key is to be creative in how the assignments are presented, and to make sure that the knowledge they require for engaging in the course is delivered in the course itself, right? So we don't count on someone having a previous geology course. And that means that a first year is on equal footing as a senior because we're not counting on anything that they've done in the past. So there's that, which is pretty simple. And then just creativity in the way that the assignments are pitched, such that either if there's like, creativity in the way the assignment is pitched, just in the sense of not trying to draw from previous knowledge and sort of orienting them towards the new. And then there's some organizational, organizational tricks that you could do as the instructor, which is if there's group work, for example, make sure that the years are evenly spread out, or make sure that the DAP and engineering people are spread out amongst groups, and don't let them sort themselves into their natural groups, because they will sort themselves into their natural groups. So there's those kind of levers that you could pull to try to make it more accessible to everyone.
Lauren,
Yeah.
did you have any tips on that?
Yeah,
Din?
I can go. It's a challenge for me because the the first time I taught this course, I had students from, say, music education, and also I had students from mechanical engineering. Right, so it's kind of challenging to make it, one, accessible, two, not boring for the engineers. Because some of those students are taking it because they are pursuing a materials engineering minor, meaning that they are taking classes that are, well, a lot more technical than what I teach here. But I think that it's kind of like it naturally happens when I introduce demonstrations that are targeted for the general audience, that kind of bridge that gap. I think a lot of students find it interesting on, well, like, why these disasters happen, because it's not something that we normally cover in classes. But sometimes they are familiar with the concept, but they didn't realize that that happened because of that. And also the project assignments intentionally targeted towards creating something new for something that happened maybe like 60 years ago or 100 years ago. So they always work on something that doesn't exist today. I think that keeps it in a way challenging, but I also don't assume anything beyond, say, a high school chemistry or physics knowledge to build on top of. So I always try to take it as simple as possible on the technical side, but still most of the things that they learn are, I would say, relatively new for them.
Yeah, I'm the same boat. We also assume people don't have prior knowledge. It does work for our majors, though, for our education students, because we're talking about learning outside the classroom, which is not taught in our education program. It really focuses on classroom-based learning. So even for those who are in our majors, it lets them stretch in a different direction. And our faculty have said that too. It's really helpful because we talk about things like children's media, which there's not time to talk about in the curriculum, but it's the kind of thing a parent will ask a teacher about, thinking a teacher may be an expert on devices, children's media at home. So it lets us address one of the what can be something that's missing in that core curriculum for education students, but also then assumes no prior knowledge for everybody else who's not an education student. So those are kind of how we balance it, is either no prior knowledge or filling in a gap that majors that doesn't fit into their current curriculum. Education has lots of rules from the state, so we have many, many things we have to put in the curriculum according to the state legislature.
Well, that's a great example, Laura. And I think I mentioned this earlier, that often faculty teach honor seminars. I mean, this is taking that to a much bigger scale. They teach them because it's something that they're not able to teach in the department's normal curriculum. So it's not a class that normally fits into whatever boxes there are, what elements are required by accreditation, or by whatever's happening in your discipline. There is knowledge you have to have as an engineer. What are the other things that you might want to do and learn, or have students do and learn, that just doesn't have time to be in there normally? So great examples. Is there anything that any of our panelists would add about how you talked about assignments and things that you have a little bit about that, some of you did, about things that you have students do and assessing that, but how do you assess learning? What types of assignments and projects do you have students engage in?
Our students work in groups, and everything is building towards this final project that goes out in the community, whether it was the exhibit project or the museum activity project. So we kind of, which is a giant project. So we break everything up into small pieces that they do in their group that gets them to that final project at the end of the semester, because it does have to move fairly quickly. So that's how we've always done it, is we've done it group work. There's very little individual work in our class, which is also a big purpose of our class. I've also found that honor students also hate group work. And I always say that to them at the beginning. I'm like, I bet you hate group work. And they're like, yes. I'm like, but it's a really important skill once you go into careers, that we're going to work on it. How do you still work on a project when you don't have total control over it? So that's how we've addressed it. Lots of little small stakes projects, and then one big project at the end in the group.
Yeah, in my class, I take the first 3 weeks to introduce very like fundamental concepts in material science at as low level as possible. And then I assign like multiple choice type of quizzes individually, those 3 weeks, to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then after that, the group work kicks in, and I have structured the YouTube project in a few stages. They first come up with the concept that the disaster and the concept that they want to study. Then we follow that with a feedback session on, I tell them what I think about what they did. And then they prepare another portion on the societal and ethical considerations. So we do another feedback session, and then they finally do the aftermath. So what happened after that? What did we learn? And another feedback session, and then they finally prepare the YouTube video at the end. And the day of the final exam, we watch those videos together, and then they do peer evaluation and also some kind of like a reflection assignment. So that's how we have started it.
The only thing I have to add to that is, if possible, I've found that assignments that utilize different skills are very useful. So in the fossils class, one of the very first assignments is to draw a fossil. We actually go and look for fossils. They each find one and they need to draw it. So obviously, people from DAP are more likely to be able to draw. There's some people who have just come in and say, I can't draw anything. And we say, well, try it, see what happens. There's other assignments that are more reflection oriented. There's assignments about standing in front of the classroom and presenting something. So as much as you could vary it, I think it's better, because then no one feels like my background is disadvantaged in this course because all the engineers are set up for this, but I'm not. So just varying it that way just equalizes things and makes it more interesting.
Thank you for that. I popped another question into the chat, thinking about how do you integrate reflection into your course and this experience for students? So thoughts from any of our faculty panelists on how you do that.
I just have, I think the main thing is at the very end, I do have a reflection assignment where I ask a number of different questions. Some of them are reflected in a way that I learn from them, like what are the things that I should continue doing in the class, what other things might be more helpful, kind of thing. But I also ask them what are like the main thing that you take away from the course, and what are the things that you would do differently, kind of thing. So reflect on both the class overall and also their experience.
I use a similar summative assessment at the end, as Dink talked about, but then we also do reflection assignments throughout the entire process. Since we're doing this iterative design cycle, we have different points in that iterative process for them to reflect. And we have them reflect on both the project, but also what's working and what's not working in their team, which also helps us to help them with problem solving skills on how many times they want us to come in and solve it, which is not the best way to intervene for them, but how do we help them work through issues that might be happening in their team, or if there are stumbling places in their project, so we can then bring resources back to help them get over whatever that stumbling block is.
And I'll add that reflection is actually, to my mind, less complicated than it first seems. I mean, all it means is they need to think about something that they've done or that they've experienced or that they've read for that matter. So it's just asking them to think about what they do, not just having them do something. And so whatever it is that they do, you could ask them to reflect on it. So it doesn't have to be this sort of big life-changing thing, although sometimes it can be. And one of the honors seminar was called The Good Life. It was about theories of living well. And the final project was to create like a life plan about how you are going to meet your goals within this, like, whatever theory of living well spoke to you. That's big, but it could be very small, like reflect on walking around Dremel Park where you found some fossils. What was difficult? What was not difficult? Like, was it easy to find? Was it, etc. So yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, Zvi, I appreciate that. And it's not often that we take that. Now I'm thinking about students walking around a park looking for fossils, doing it very mindfully. So it's not often that we take that space out to be mindful about what we're doing. And we're really trying to encourage that and cultivate that in our students to help them engage in those reflective practices and be mindful and thoughtful and think about what they're doing and learning and what comes out of it. So for our faculty panelists, how do you benefit from teaching from honor seminar courses? Throughout, you've shared some of those ways, but what comes to mind as you think about why should somebody do this? Why do you stick with us and why do you keep coming back and doing this?
That's easy. I'll pop in. The students are great. It's, it's smaller courses. I mean, it depends on what you teach, but they're relatively small courses for me, which is nice. The students tend to be more interested than just an average grouping of 20 some odd kids. And they come from interesting backgrounds, so they all have something to contribute. They're kind of used to being challenged more directly than, again, the average group of people. So I think it's just kind of interacting with the students that is the benefit for me.
Yeah, I agree what's been said. I mean, students are great. I also like, in a way, to challenge myself, because explaining very technical, complex things, not always easy without using the technical terminology for it. In a way, it also helps me just think about how I can communicate with a broader audience.
These students are so much fun to work with, which you've heard already. They're really fun. They're interesting. And I think I've been here 18 years, so it's also one of those things of how do you sometimes keep being a faculty member feeling fresh? And this is kind of can take you in a new direction if you feel like you teach the same classes semester and you feel like you're getting stuck. This is a great way to kind of get into that unstuck place. I also teach in a field I mentioned earlier, educated, that is highly legislated. Highly legislated of exactly what has to be taught, what we have to cover. So it is hard to teach outside of those restrictions, both accreditation restrictions and Ohio legislative restrictions. So it's a way for me to get other content that I think is important out into the field and lets me kind of tap into what my background is. In working in it, and it's super fun. You get to do really non-traditional things if you want, because you aren't worried, is this going to mess up something later in the student's progress in your major, things like that. So it can be really open-ended in that way, which is great.
Thank you. One last final, unless our participants have questions, one last final question for our panelists. Is there anything that you haven't shared yet that you would want to share and leave with folks who are thinking about teaching an honor seminar? Any advice for faculty thinking about doing this, or something that we didn't ask about or didn't come up? It's okay if you don't have anything else, but I want to give that opportunity if there's something else in your mind.
I'll say, since I'm an associate dean, there is kind of the how do I talk to my department head about this and get permission to do this? So one of the things that there is money that comes along with teaching these courses. So you can use it in different ways. I've seen some programs who use it to pay for an adjunct to take care of your load class, because these become the issues. Well, of course you want to teach something, but I need to have all your stuff covered. So sometimes your department can use that money to teach a load class. Sometimes that department, you can use it to, you essentially are teaching it extra, but instead of getting paid an overload, maybe it just becomes travel money for you. Or for us, I get to spend a lot of money on what the students want to make and design, because I don't have to find that money in my college budget. I have this budget. Honors pays for buses. We take our students to museums and public spaces all over the city. So we have buses that are paid for. I'm able to buy whatever materials they want when they're designing and building things. So those are some of kind of the, like, how you tell your department head and get permission to do this. So I guess that's my advice, is there are ways around this that doesn't, it's purposely designed in a way that leave your department whole financially.